Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another segment of Conversations with Carmen. This morning, I am truly excited to be joined by a fellow private practitioner as well as an esteemed colleague. His name is Mr. Pisey Sok. He is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I am once again truly excited to be chatting with him this morning. So thank you, Pisey, for joining me this morning.
All right. Well, thank you so much to Carmen for the honor, just for being here. So I just want to say it is a joy to be here with you. I've seen these episodes that you've had with other practitioners, and it's just an honor to be here. And I want to just speak blessing and peace over everybody who's going to be listening in. And I hope this is going to be a meaningful conversation with you and I. So, yeah.
So you did share with me that you and your family immigrated from Southeast Asia, specifically Cambodia, and came to the United States. I believe you and your family traveled to Oregon in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, what was that process like for you? And I think I'm asking in terms of your own personal acculturation process. What did that look like for you? How did that play out? And how would you say that that experience impacted you as a person or as an individual?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't know a whole lot of the difference between Cambodia and, or actually, it was Thailand. I was born in a refugee camp.
Oh, wow.
So all I knew was just living in a very makeshift hut, with just resources that you gain and get from, daily from the NGOs that would distribute food. And then going from that to Oregon, you can imagine the first time I landed actually in Portland, I remember it was actually during Christmas, around that Christmas season. So you go from a tropical region and now we're wearing coats, right? And I was like, what is going on? And I saw the lights and everything. Okay, what in the world are we at? And I was fairly young, so 4 years old. You can imagine the impressions of the two climates. It was very different, right?
For sure.
And on top of that, as I started to become more aware, I went to school like everybody else, kindergarten and so forth. And the thing that I noticed was that my family would speak a different language. So English and Khmer, which is we call Cambodian, but Khmer is the word. We say Khmer. That's the way the English kind of transliteration. But Khmer is what I spoke at home, and English is what I spoke at school.
Wow.
I ate rice and Cambodian food at home, and then I ate school lunches at. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, what do I do with this, right?
Right.
And I could imagine we were sitting in class and everybody would go around, and the first thing they would do is roll call, right? And the first thing they would say is, you go around and say the names, and they would stop at the S's. My last name is Sok, and so you can always tell when the teacher is saying, my name and get ready to be presented, and roll call, I know I'll get like Pisey or Pisey or Pisey and all kinds of, and then people just chuckle, right? These kids. And that became the story of my life. Every single year was the beginning of the school year, was that my name was going to be standing out.
Yeah.
But obviously I have a larger role with it. My skin got a little thicker, and just realizing that's just the way, part of my culture, my name, what my parents identified me as,
Sure.
And so at that point I discovered that I'm different.
Mm-hmm.
I'm different. My name just means different. It has a different meaning than a lot of my colleagues and my classmates. So then at that point, I realized I'm actually swimming in two different worlds.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So learning that was, first of all, was recognizing my own internal, at the time I didn't have awareness. I just was feeling like this is awkward,
Right.
And when my parents came to parent meetings, for the school meetings.
Right.
My father, by the way, was he was in his 70s. And my mother was a little younger. She was in her early 30s.
Okay.
So you can imagine, even sitting in the classroom, is that your grandfather? I was like,
Right.
that's my dad. And so then that tells a whole story. Like, well, what, how did this happen?
Absolutely.
And I realized there's something about my story that's fairly sacred, that I even got to come to this place where my parents went, and I found out later that my parents went through genocide, and I didn't figure this out until I got to high school.
Wow.
We're studying about the Vietnam War, and the teacher in my civics class was like, does anybody know about Pol Pot? I was like, the name sounds familiar.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized the word Pol Pot was actually a curse word in my culture.
Wow.
It as a very derogatory, like the era of Pol Pot.
Right.
They would say the word is Samaya Boat, right, which means like it's the era of Pol Pot, right?
Right.
and I didn't realize what they meant. And then when I saw the story and watched the killing fields for the first time, my eyes were just open, like, oh my,
Right. Right.
that's what my parents went through. Then it all made sense. Like it explains why we wore the coats of, coming from from Thailand to America to Portland, and then my parents having to deal with the trauma of it all. It explains so much. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden I had this grief wash over me. Like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh,
Right.
this is what my parents went through. And it's almost like I came home. I remember I came home and I asked my father's like, who's Pol Pot? And they like had this look like, oh my gosh, he knows. Our son finally, they tried to shelter me from the trauma, and finally I was aware of it. And then we started having these dialogues. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is amazing. And I would imagine that being a part of your own personal process, and I think what I'm trying to say is being an active participant in your own life and witnessing layers unfold one at a time.
yeah,
And
yeah,
every layer, in my mind at least, the way it's resonating on my end is every layer represents um, a realization, a
correct.
moment of enlightenment, a
Yes,
bit of educational history,
yes.
layers, unpacking. And what I'm sort of grounded with on my end now is no wonder this has been, you describe it as such a sacred process.
And you nailed it. And I think as these streams of, you can say, consciousness or wisdom that comes to us through our various experiences,
Sure.
that's one piece of it, that cultural piece. And then you have the spiritual piece too, because I think I may have mentioned in our initial interview was that my father was a shaman, right?
Yep.
He was a medicine man of the ancient way of the Cambodian people,
Wow.
the Brahmanistic tradition of India,
Yeah.
which Cambodia is a melting pot of, Eastern culture, which is from you can usually call the Orient, from China, the East Asian,
Uh-huh.
and then you have the South Asian, and then you have the Southeast Asian. It's kind of the melting pot of all these different convergence between India and China, and,
Wow.
and so you can see it manifest. That's why Cambodians have a very spectrum of color. Like,
Yeah.
so I'm more in between, but then you have
Right.
your skin Cambodia, and you got those who are more indigenous, similar,
Yes.
and it's almost like it's amazing to discover this. And once I started to notice that, wow, my at home, my house smells like incense because my father's,
Okay.
he's meditating, he's praying,
Right.
and this altar set up. And then when I go, and when I go to school, we don't have that. So obviously, there's something different when I step out of my house and into the environment. I have to make sense of why is this here? What's significant about this? And so I was always very
Mm.
inquisitive. Then once we talked about in my upbringing too, the clash of how to handle the existential crisis of death. I
Yeah.
experienced death early on when my friend passed away from a tragic bus accident when I was
Yes.
in middle school. That just, again, is another layer of awareness.
Yeah. And I remember yes, you did share that with me. And I was really honored that you were so transparent and candid about that experience. And I do remember one of the more poignant takeaways from our conversation was when when you shared that with me, disclosed that experience that you had gone through, that traumatic experience.
Absolutely.
One of the things that you said to me that stuck was coming out of that experience, and don't quote me, I'm sort of paraphrasing, but I believe you said something to the effect of, I discovered or I realized the frailty of life.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that a little bit.
That's a great question. Well, when you're a kid, you have this invincibility about you. Like you have this unlocked potential. Like I can do a lot of things, and I want to do that. I want to fly because this sense of wonder captivates
Oh,
your heart as a child,
right. Hmm.
and that sense of wonder, for some odd reason, as life goes on, you start to get depleted because of all the reality of life,
Sure.
pain, the suffering, and that sense of wonder we have to recapture as adults. And we seem like, for me at the time, I thought, I can fly. I want to be able to figure out how does birds do that? What's in the stars in the heavens? And
Right.
that sense of wonder got shattered when I realized that death can take that all away.
Ah, yeah.
And so at that point, that experience of death really took that frame of wonder, saying, so how does wonder then get recaptured when death just seems to deplete all of that?
Sure.
And so for me, when I discovered the frailty of life, I had to understand, okay, so death could either be the end of wonder or it could be the beginning of wonder.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
And I suppose that's why when I started to discover my own grief journey, I realized that there's a mystery to death that I thought death was the end of it, when in fact it was only maybe just a portal into a deeper level reality
Sure.
of transcendence, right? And so,
Absolutely.
and I suppose that the frailty of life allowed me this posture of humility and saying, wow, at any moment in time, it could be taken from me, but yet it doesn't mean that that wonder gets lost.
Right.
It's just transitioning and shifting, because now it's giving me another stream of consciousness and a stream of understanding that I have to integrate into my life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can only imagine having that powerful of a framework and understanding and acceptance of the meaning of death and what it means to make a transition
Yeah.
from life, from earthly life to back to one's soulful life or spiritual.
Correct. Can I?
I can only imagine, how that deep of an understanding and, like I said, acceptance not only impacts clients, for example, in your practice who may be struggling or interested in navigating
Yeah.
the grief and loss process, but then also the impact that it most likely has on you as a person. Because
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't want to go too deep down the rabbit trail here, but I don't know. I'm just thinking that the more as we experience life here on earth, the more that we can wrap our heads around the concept of death, life and
Yeah.
death, and what that life cycle means to us. And like I said, if we can reach a point of comfort and confidence
Yes.
and feel grounded and anchored,
Yes.
imagine how much more powerfully you can show up while you're here doing
Yeah.
the work that you were called for. I think a lot of people, no judgment, myself included, make it stuck sometimes,
Yes.
wondering, being anxious. Well, what is life after death? Well, what's going to happen when
Yeah.
I take my last breath here?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. And then that becomes a distraction.
100%. And you're 100% right about that. And I had this moment, this existential awareness where, I'm a religious, I'm actually not, I'm a man of faith. So
Yeah.
I grew up with this idea that transcendence always existed. So that, this earth suit that we have,
Sure.
it fades, it decays, but yet for some reason, if this decays, why is it that people who are older have more wisdom? So that has to continue to be retained.
Right.
There's something about this posture when things decay, but yet wisdom increases. Wait, how do we handle this paradox? So
Mhm.
I got to this realization where I think I was in college, and I got angry with God, right?
Right.
And I said, why did you allow my family to go through this?
Yeah.
There's like millions of people dying, and I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. I learned about the Holocaust, and I was like, doesn't make any sense. And I was complaining, and this is a story in the scriptures about a man named Job who lost everything, right?
Yes.
To tragedy. It's a story about a man who had everything. He lost his family, his health, his property, and then he's sitting there wondering why this happened.
Right.
And I had that Job moment. And for those who may not know the story, and then in the story, it's like this long drawn out saga, and eventually at the end, Job asks these series of questions to God, like kind of this kind of almost like dramatic way.
Mm-hmm.
And he puts questions after questions after questions. And then finally, when Job is done, then God actually finally, for the first time, speaks. It's almost like God is silent throughout the entire story. And then lastly, God answers. He says, where were you when I formed the heavens? Where were you when I set all these things in place?
Right.
Where were you when all these things were put into its order? And it's almost like I had this moment, this Job moment, when God said to me, do you realize that if the genocide didn't happen, you wouldn't be born?
Wow.
Right? Because my father and mother had two separate families.
Yeah.
Separate lives. They grew in two separate parts of the country. They would have never met if it wasn't for this tragedy. So I'm thinking to myself, wow, you know what? Even tragedy is a mystery.
Absolutely. And what's
And
opposite of tragedy? Mm-hmm.
yes, and I'm a beneficiary of that tragedy, which is strange to say, because the moment I start to complain is the same thing. The very meaning of that gave me the sense of life. I'm like, okay,
Right.
I'm gonna think of it, God, you're right. I don't understand the mystery of this. I have to
Right.
submit to the fact that I don't know.
Absolutely.
That's where the posture of humility we were talking about it a lot. That's what's gotten me to, like, there's certain things that I don't know, and I have to accept the fact that. But what I do know is that I have this life that's now framing the way I see my work. Whatever this
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, I assume is bolstered by just your, your unwavering faith in God and just faith in his process and trusting his process.
Absolutely.
That's sort of the framework, I would imagine. So
Absolutely.
wonderful. I am wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about the specific therapeutic modalities that you utilize in your practice. I know that you mentioned EMDR, and and there's one, I believe, is it restoration therapy?
Restoration therapy.
Yes. Okay. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I went to Fuller School of Psychology, which is also known as Fuller Seminary or Theological Seminary, Pasadena.
Mm-hmm.
And so they emphasize integration between psychology and faith, right? So we don't see that as like opposed to each other, but they're informing each other, right? Because
Right.
theology answers questions that psychology also, answers, and vice versa. So, anyways, so I always grew up with this idea of having to integrate faith and psychology, right? Because I'm trying to understand, why do people do what they do, and also explain what is behind the transcendent framework. So with restoration therapy, I was intrigued by, because I was trained actually to be a pastor, because my existential struggle with grief and trauma and loss.
Right.
Actually, I didn't go was trained to be as a seminary or as a therapist. It's kind of, the stream just kind of took me that direction.
Sure.
And I took this class called let's see, it was the class on forgiveness. It was a class on the psychology of forgiveness by
Wow.
Dr. Terry Hart. And when I took that class, it transformed the way I understand forgiveness. I thought forgiveness is like, oh, just forgiving and forgetting. I was like, no, there's a complexity to this.
Wow.
So I started getting introduced to this framework called restoration therapy. And that restoration therapy is looking at the violation of two domains, which is the violation of identity, which we encompass as love, who we are, right? As how we're loved tells us, we, I guess, internalize our identity, like how we're loved. We're unique, we're worthy, we belong.
Sure.
We are enough. That's the domain of love, right?
Right.
How we know really early on how we love. We use the word attachment, but that's exactly what that is.
Right.
And then that attachment that also encompasses this aspect of trust.
Okay.
So it's the love piece, who am I? And then how I'm loved is the trustworthiness piece. So these two violations are what you're trying to balance.
Okay.
And so restoration therapy, they focus on balancing, restoring the harmony between love, identity, trustworthiness, and also this element of power. Power is the influential component of how we move and navigate between the two.
Wow.
Because a lot of times when we're violated in these domains, we feel that sense of disempowerment. And that's what causes the resentment and the bitterness and the manifestation about the pathology. So restoration therapy is to look at these two essential domains as well within the wheelhouse of interpersonal dynamics.
Sure.
So once I, started learning about that, I'm like, this explains a lot as to why I'm feeling what I'm feeling.
Right.
And then at that point, I'm able to then take this kind of knowledge base. I was applying it in some of my pastoral work, but I realized there's still more. I need more of this. And then that's what kind of drove me into the domain of, of mental health. And then I started learning CBT, in when I was doing community mental health in Long Beach, working with the Cambodian community there.
Right.
And I realized, okay, there's trauma here. Okay, how do we deal with trauma then? Okay, and then the EMDR came in the back end. So it was almost like as if each layer became revealed to me, more tools came to deal with those revelations. So that's kind of what it was in the process. Build a tool belt and the toolbox.
That's amazing. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And how would you say, on average or overarchingly, how do those clients who you do utilize the restoration therapy approach with, how do they resonate with it? Are they open to it? Do they understand it? Do they vibe with it? What's been your experience?
I think it's been a solid experience, especially with a lot of couples work, because they recognize there's a debt of trust that you bring into the relationship. Now, you may have triggered the debt, you didn't cause it.
Right.
Because the family of origin and the upbringing we had, like for me, I was born into debt. I didn't choose to be a genocide survivor. That's just part of the debt that someone else caused, but it manifested in the trauma that my parents went through, and it manifested in the way they raised and, and brought us up. So
Right.
I was born into debt already, regardless. And so at that point, being aware of that debt is recognizing, okay, do I choose to use this debt to build interest on other relationships, which we
Right.
bring to, or do I take ownership of my debt, figure out how to reframe it, and then be able to speak life into that as opposed to death and debt. So this is where we do a lot of the work. So once we have the language, it says, wow, I realized I was indebted. I didn't even know, but I'm paying this debt that I'm not even realize I'm doing.
Right. Right.
And we call that destructive entitlement. That's the idea where something violent, I was mistreated by something that was unfair to me, and now I'm expecting you, Carmen, in my life to pay for it.
Right.
That's and it didn't cause it though.
Absolutely.
That's destructive entitlement.
Right. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that distortion then is what we're trying to stop from repeating this we call revolving slate.
Okay. Absolutely.
Debt of violation of trust, power, and identity.
That makes a lot of sense. And you said that one of the words that stuck with me was that restorative. And in order to execute that or foster or cultivate that, you have to understand, acknowledge, accept the indebtedness, where the debt occurred, how it's playing out, and what your role in it, if any, is, in order to get to the point of pushing forward this concept or this idea of restoration. Yes, it just clicked. Okay.
Yes, and so once the client comes to a place of saying, "Oh my gosh, I create the same debt by my own sense of it."
Yeah,
you're entitled to it. You're entitled to fairness, but then because you're born into this deficit now.
Yes,
your framework is not neutral.
Absolutely.
And that illusion or of neutrality is not there, because we're always born with some depth. As a person of color, I was born with some setback.
Sure.
Being in, and especially as an immigrant with genocide as part of my story, that's emotional that I could not control. But if I'm not aware of it, I can use the interest rate in other relationships.
Absolutely. Wow. Fantastic. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay. And for anyone who's watching, who's, I just want to drop this mention really quickly, if you're interested in learning more about restoration therapy, I'm going to ask Pisey at the end of our conversation in a few minutes to share his, the best email address to reach him at. And if you have any questions or would like to learn more about restoration therapy, or even reach out to him and, ask for resources, feel free. But I am curious about something else you said to me during our original chat. One of your overarching intentions in working with your clients is to create what you called a generous space for them.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
Yeah. I know that there's nothing new under the sun, and so everything kind of gets repackaged in its context. And I think, we talked about this idea of generosity coming from the Rogerian perspective, right? Or like the unconditional positive regard perspective. Because we don't understand where they've come from. We already have this value judgment embedded into our framework.
Sure.
And in which case, it's important for us to be able to suspend that for a minute to see what really framed this person's experience.
Right.
And so for me, that posture of generosity and humility is really, it comes from my worldview, actually. Because I'm a Christian. So one of the things that from the framework of Christianity is that when God created the world, you will notice that there's 4 aspects of God that's important. One is that God is creative, because he fashioned everything. 2 is that he's relational, or God self is relational, whether he or she. God's relational is that because God exhibits both male and femaleness within God's character.
Right.
Then there's a relationality to that. And then there's also this aspect of, I would say, it's generosity, right? In other words, God created human beings and placed them in this garden to experience all of this.
Right.
Did it ask God's permission? God decided, here, I'm going to give you this, create.
Yeah.
Enjoy, connect, build. So that generosity was already built into our human creativity. And the last piece that is something overlooked is humility, because God formed out of dirt the dust, which is actually mud. If you look at the story, it's dust mixed with the water.
Right.
And so that mud then was what was the lowest part of creation, because you got the heavens, the stars, the sky, the water, and then the last
Right.
thing that's created is the mud, which
Right.
is the lowest part of creation, but yet it was what God's lips brought breath to.
Wow.
So the king of the universe, of the creator, brought his lips to the ground to breathe life into what we call human beings. Matter of fact, the word human beings is the word hummus is the Latin term for mud.
Wow.
Thus, the term human beings are people who are made of the mud, and thus is given the dignity of divinity through the breath of life. So for me, this frames this aspect of this generous space, because we are creating God's image. So therefore, we are creative, we are relational, we have the capacity to be generous, and we find the most fulfillment in humility. I suppose I believe that people are attracted to more to humility than to arrogance.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be around an arrogant person. They may have resources, but the only reason why you're there is because of resources. But you don't want to be around it. You don't want to associate with an arrogant person.
Sure.
You usually are drawn more to humility. That's why the Mother Teresas of the world,
Absolutely.
right? The Gandhis of the world, the MLKs of the world. That's why we're drawn to that. It's because there's something about humility that has a sense of power and security that says,
Yeah.
something about that. It's because I think humility is the gateway to divinity.
Absolutely. Wonderful.
And this is why for me to kind of create that space is that I believe that if I foster this value of creativity, generosity, relationality, and humility, I believe that the divine presence can be experienced in those interactions.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So as we wind down, is there anything else that you would love for us to know about you that I didn't already inquire about?
Yeah, I have an amazing son, 7 years old. His name is Ruben. Let me give a shout out to him. God bless this young boy, very gifted. So I'm honored to be a father. Just to be able to be able to see this other stream that's now growing in this little boy's life. So I'm grateful for him. And also, I also cut hair. I'm not a barber because I'm not licensed or anything of that sort. I was thinking about this where I would integrate barbering with therapy. And then someone said, maybe we call it the therapy, right? The therapy.
Oh, I love that.
So anyway, we were laughing. I was like, that's creative. And anyways, but I started cutting hair back in the day, and I also cut my own hair. So I had a very traumatic. Speaking about trauma, I went to a barber back in the day, college, and they just messed up my fade, and I was like, no, no. So then I started cutting my own hair, and at that point, I've been doing it since college, and this becomes another stream. It's another stream of God's blessing, and I have a little studio at my spot here, and a lot of brothers just come. It's just an easy on ramp to talk about mental health,
wonderful
conversations. It's another place to create that generous, that generous space for people.
That's right.
And it's also an expression of creativity and generosity, and humility, because it's just all the things it's working for me. And I really enjoy that. That is one of my expression of creativity and being able to do that. And, it's interesting when you see guys come in and, they're a little rough around the edges, you line them up and then they all walk in slow-mo when they get out. It's like, it's like, okay, so you do your part to help, a man's soul to be able to be a better instrument in the world. So
for sure,
I have a heart for men. I always say, reach the man, you reach the home, right? Absolutely. And that's always my joy is to to talk about men's mental health, because I believe this toxic masculinity is too strong. That's because of the debt. It's because of the debt.
Right. Absolutely.
And so for me to be able to speak life into brothers, to be better fathers, better boyfriends and husbands, that's my joy, to bring peace to the home. And that's what
wonderful. That is wonderful.
One haircut at a time.
So. One haircut at a time. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yes.
Wow. Well, I have absolutely enjoyed this time with you, Pisey. I cannot thank you enough for, sharing your life story with me, or bits of it. I'm sure there's, tons more, but I appreciate the candor and the transparency and just the willingness to show up and engage in this exchange. And I know that, viewers, after this, interview gets posted, I know that so many other people are going to just experience, an immense amount of positive takeaways from this conversation. And like I said, I really hope that you're open to people reaching out to you via email if they have, questions or, anything that comes up for them. But I've absolutely enjoyed my time with you. Thank you again for joining me. How should people contact you? What's the best email address for you?
Yeah, there's a few email addresses. You can reach me at the Soul Tender, which is psok.ip@soultenders.com. And then, or my other one is piseysok.mft@gmail.
Wonderful.
Either one is fine. Yeah, they can reach out to me that way.
Excellent.
And that's the easiest way to contact me. And I can send resources about restoration therapy and things like that.
Excellent.
And it's just an honor. It's been a joy to be here with you, Carmen, and I appreciate the space. It's really, like I said, we as people, we can go all day. This could be like a series of conversations.
Believe me, yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So as I close, may I give a blessing to those who are watching, and for you as well. We in the Cambodian culture, we give a fivefold blessing.
Okay.
We encounter, especially as they pass.
Yes.
Through our life, right? And so we speak, we say, right? May you have, a you means you have life. A you is, they ask you how old you are. So the word is a you, may you have life, right? May you have a you, but not means is the radiance of that life. That radiates through your countenance, your face.
Wow.
Right? May you have the light that radiates through your face and countenance, and then that radiance produces peace, which is sokat. My name's Sok. Sokat means peace. It comes from the Pali word for peace.
Wow. Which
is the same word for, like, in Hebrew is the word shalom, right?
Yes.
And bole is strength. May you have the endurance for this journey. May you have that. You have the light, the radiance, the peace, the endurance, and then may you have body benet, which may you have wisdom to discern all that life throws at you. Wow. And may that be true for everybody who's watching, and also for you, Dr. Carmen. May God bless and keep you, and thank you again for this honor. So.
Thank you so much. So much. Thank you so much. Take care.
Yes, blessings.
Okay.